When I walked into my daughter's apartment, holding her birthday gift, she looked at me and said, "Mom, you're too old for this party. Maybe you should just go home." The words hit me like a punch to my stomach, forcing the air from my lungs in a silent gasp. Too old for this party? My own daughter Amber, the little girl I had raised alone for 23 years, was staring at me with embarrassment in her eyes, as her friends pretended not to hear. I clutched the carefully wrapped package in my trembling hands, the silver paper suddenly seeming childish and inappropriate, just like me. Too old for this party. The room tilted slightly as I tried to process what was happening. Amber was turning 25, and I had just turned 52 last month. I had driven 40 minutes across town, gotten my hair done specially at Supercuts for $58.75, and bought a new blouse from Macy's that the young sales girl had assured me was totally age-appropriate but still cute for $64.99. And now, I stood frozen in the doorway of my daughter's apartment while conversation awkwardly resumed around me. I managed to force a smile that felt like cracked glass on my face. "Of course, sweetie. I just wanted to drop off your gift." My voice sounded hollow and far away, like it belonged to someone else. I set the package on the side table near the door, careful not to make eye contact with any of the 20-somethings who filled the room with their smooth skin and effortless style. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" I added, already backing toward the door. Amber didn't even walk me out. She just nodded, relief visibly washing over her features as she turned back to her friends. "Thanks, Mom," she called over her shoulder, already reabsorbed into the gathering. I heard someone ask who was that. As the door closed behind me, the hallway outside her apartment was mercifully empty as I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly unsteady beneath me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out the muffled laughter and music from inside. The practical beige carpet of the hallway blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had been looking forward to this evening for weeks. I had even practiced conversation topics in my head, determined not to embarrass my daughter by seeming out of touch. I had researched current music trends and watched 3 episodes of whatever show she had mentioned loving last time we spoke on the phone. What a fool I had been. The drive home was a blur, muscle memory guiding me through familiar streets while my mind replayed those 7 words over and over. "Mom, you're too old for this party." By the time I pulled into my driveway at 8:47 p.m., my shock had calcified into something harder and colder. I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, the careful makeup, the newly trimmed hair with its subtle highlights that cost an extra $35. The statement earrings I had deliberated over for 20 minutes at the store. All that effort to appear younger, cooler, more acceptable, and it hadn't mattered at all. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I sat on my couch in the dark, still wearing my party outfit, and calculated exactly how much money I had spent on my daughter in her lifetime. Childcare, approximately $127,500 over 15 years. College tuition and expenses, $164,230. Monthly support during her unpaid internship year, $14,400. The down payment on her car 2 years ago, $5,000. The security deposit for that very apartment where I'd been humiliated today, $2,200. As the numbers added up in my head, I felt something shift inside me, not just hurt, but the first flicker of indignation. 23 years of sacrifices, of putting her needs first, of working overtime and weekends at the insurance agency to provide her with opportunities I never had. 23 years of being both mother and father after her dad walked out when she was just 2 years old. And now, at 52, I was suddenly an embarrassment to be dismissed. The sound of my phone ringing startled me out of my calculations. It was 11:23 p.m. I expected, hoped, it might be Amber calling to apologize. Instead, my sister Kate's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, not wanting to explain what had happened. But something made me pick up. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. Kate saw through it immediately. "What's wrong, Ellen? You sound terrible." The simple kindness in her voice almost broke me. Amber didn't want me at her birthday party, I said, the words hanging in the silence between us. She told me I was too old to be there. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that had been circling around the edges of my consciousness all evening. Kate's sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of colorful expletives that would have shocked our mother. She did what? She demanded. Tell me everything. So I did. The story pouring out of me in a rush of hurt and humiliation. When I finished, Kate was quiet for a long moment. You know what this means, right? She finally said. I didn't answer, staring at the dark outline of the potted fern in the corner of my living room. It means, Kate continued, her voice fierce, that it's finally time for you to start living for yourself, Ellen. You've spent your entire adult life being Amber's mother. Maybe it's time to figure out who Ellen Reynolds actually is. I almost laughed at the dramatic statement. I'm 52, Kate. It's a little late for self-discovery, don't you think? But even as I said it, something small and curious stirred inside me. Who was I, outside of being Amber's mother? Outside of being an insurance claims processor who had worked at the same company for 19 years, I had been so busy surviving, providing, making sure Amber had everything she needed, that I had never really asked myself that question. It's never too late, Kate said firmly. And 52 isn't old, despite what your daughter thinks. Mom was 54 when she went back to school and became a paralegal, remember? And she worked until she was 72. After we hung up, I finally allowed myself to cry, not delicate tears, but ugly hiccuping sobs that left my throat raw and my eyes swollen. I cried for the young woman I had been at 29, suddenly alone with a toddler and no idea how I would manage. I cried for all the dreams I had set aside, the trips not taken, the chances not seized because security had always seemed more important. And I cried for the relationship with my daughter that suddenly seemed like a mirage. Had she always been embarrassed by me, and I just hadn't noticed? When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollowed out but somehow lighter. I went to the bathroom and washed my face, avoiding my reflection in the mirror. Then I changed into my oldest, most comfortable pajamas, made a cup of chamomile tea, and curled up in bed with my laptop. I'm not sure what exactly I was looking for as I began searching online that night. Perhaps validation that I wasn't alone, that other women my age had experienced this kind of dismissal. What I found was both disturbing and strangely comforting. Forum after forum filled with stories from women in their 40s, 50s, 60s describing the exact moment they realized they had become invisible. A 57-year-old professor who was consistently talked over in meetings by male colleagues, decades her junior. A 49-year-old divorced woman whose teenage children rolled their eyes when she mentioned trying online dating. A 62-year-old who was passed over for a promotion in favor of a 34-year-old with half her experience. The stories went on, each one a variation on the same theme. Once women reached a certain age, society, and sometimes even their own families, began to look through them rather than at them. I read until my eyes burned, until the numbers on my bedside clock flipped to 3:17 a.m. Then I closed my laptop and lay in the darkness, thinking about what Kate had said. Maybe it was time to figure out who Ellen Reynolds actually was. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I fell asleep with those words echoing in my mind. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a strange sense of calm. It was Saturday, and for the first time in years, I had no obligations to anyone but myself. No weekend work to catch up on, no errands to run for Amber, no family responsibilities. I made coffee and took it out to my small backyard patio, something I rarely had time to enjoy despite having lived in this house for 12 years. As I sat there watching the early morning light filter through the oak tree, my phone buzzed with a text from Amber. Sorry about last night. My friends wanted to go to a club after and I knew that wouldn't be your scene. Brunch soon. No acknowledgement of her hurtful words. No real apology. Just a casual dismissal, as if what had happened was completely normal and acceptable. In the past, I would have immediately responded with understanding and forgiveness. I would have suggested a date for brunch and pretended everything was fine. Instead, I set my phone down without answering and continued to sip my coffee, watching a hummingbird dart among the flowering bushes I had planted years ago but rarely stopped to appreciate. For 3 hours, I ignored my phone. I took a long shower, made myself a proper breakfast instead of just grabbing a granola bar, and even pulled out a novel I had bought months ago but never started reading. When I finally picked up my phone again, there were 2 more texts from Amber. The second one slightly annoyed. "Mom, did you get my text?" I typed out a response that felt foreign to my fingers. "I got it. I need some time to think. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk." Then I turned my phone off completely, something I had never done before, in case Amber needed me, and went to get dressed. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the local community center where I used to take Amber for swimming lessons when she was little. The place had been renovated since I'd last been there, but the same kinds of bulletin boards lined the entry hall, covered with colorful flyers advertising classes, events, and local services. I stood there reading them all, from yoga for seniors to pottery workshops to community theater auditions. One flyer in particular caught my eye, a women's writing group that met on Tuesday evenings, open to all ages and experience levels. "Share your story," it proclaimed in bold letters, "because every woman's voice matters." Something about those words made my throat tighten. When was the last time I had felt that my voice mattered? As I was staring at the flyer, a woman about my age approached the bulletin board. She had short silver hair that she wore in an elegant style that looked intentional rather than simply aging, and bright blue reading glasses perched on her nose. "The writing group is wonderful," she said, noticing my interest. "I've been going for about 8 months now." I was startled, both by her comment and by being seen at all. "Oh, I was just looking," I said automatically. "I'm not a writer." The woman smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Neither was I, until I started going. I'm Patricia, by the way." She held out her hand, and I shook it, introducing myself. "Are you interested in writing, Ellen?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. Was I interested in writing? I had loved English class in high school, had even taken a creative writing course my first year of community college before I got pregnant with Amber and had to focus on more practical studies. I used to be, I admitted. A long time ago. Patricia nodded as if this made perfect sense. That's how it starts for most of us. We used to be interested in a lot of things, before life got in the way. There was no judgment in her voice, just simple understanding. "You should come check it out. Next meeting is this Tuesday at 7 p.m. No pressure to share anything. You can just listen the first few times if you want." She pointed to the room number on the flyer. "We usually have cookies," she added with a conspiratorial smile. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. "That's my grandson. I'm supposed to be meeting him for lunch. Think about it, okay?" And then she was gone, leaving me still standing at the bulletin board, holding the edge of the flyer where I had started to take down the contact information. I drove home with the writing group information in my purse, feeling strangely lightened by the brief encounter. Someone had seen me not as Amber's mother, or as a middle-aged woman who should know better than to attend her daughter's party, but as a person who might have interests and a voice worth hearing. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental after last night. Sunday passed quietly. I turned my phone back on and found 3 more increasingly worried texts from Amber, culminating in "Mom, you're scaring me. Please respond." I sent a brief message letting her know I was fine but still needed some space. Then I did something I had never done before. I blocked her number for 24 hours. The action made my heart race with anxiety, but also with a strange, almost illicit sense of freedom. I spent the day cleaning out my closet, ruthlessly sorting through clothes I had kept for years but rarely wore. By evening, I had 8 garbage bags, 3 for donation, 5 for the trash. I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant instead of cooking, ate it straight from the containers while watching a documentary about women artists that had been in my Netflix queue for months, and went to bed early with my new novel. Monday morning arrived with its usual jarring alarm at 6:30 a.m. I had been at Midwest Insurance for 19 years, working my way up from data entry clerk to senior claims processor. The office was a 15-minute drive from my house, a low-slung brick building in a bland office park, where I spent 40 hours each week in a gray cubicle under fluorescent lights. I had never loved the job, but it had provided stability, decent health insurance, and enough income to support Amber and myself comfortably. As I dressed in my usual work attire, sensible slacks, a conservative blouse, practical low heels, I found myself examining my reflection with new eyes. When had I started dressing as if trying to blend into the wallpaper? Had it been a gradual shift, or had I always approached my appearance with this careful invisibility? The morning staff meeting started, as it always did, with our department manager, Richard Hazy, discussing the week's goals while the team of 12 claims processors sat around the conference table pretending to take notes. Richard was 42, 10 years my junior, but had been promoted to management 3 years ago while I remained in the same position, despite having trained him when he first joined the company. "We need to streamline our response times," he was saying, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation that nobody was really watching. "Customers don't want to wait more than 24 hours for claim acknowledgement." I found myself studying the faces around the table. Besides myself, there were only 2 other employees over 50. Harold, who had been with the company for 25 years and was counting down to retirement, and Meredith, who worked part-time and was often overlooked for special projects, despite her expertise. The rest of the team was predominantly in their 30s, with a few ambitious 20-somethings fresh out of college. As I looked at them, I realized that the younger employees were the ones Richard called on for input, the ones assigned to client presentations and industry conferences. When had the shift happened? When had experience become less valuable than youth? "Ellen, you're handling the Westridge account, right?" Richard's voice broke into my thoughts. I nodded, automatically reaching for my notepad where I kept meticulous records of all my accounts. "They called this morning wanting an update on their claim status. Can you make that a priority today?" His tone was polite but slightly condescending, as if he doubted my ability to prioritize my own workload. "I sent them a detailed update on Friday afternoon," I replied, checking my notes. "Their claim is being processed according to schedule. They should receive the first payment by Wednesday." Richard blinked, clearly not having expected such a thorough response. "Well, check in with them again anyway," he said, already moving on to the next agenda item. "They're an important client." As the meeting continued, I found myself noticing things I had previously accepted without question. The way Richard interrupted Meredith twice when she tried to offer suggestions. The easy camaraderie he shared with the younger team members, joking about weekend plans and sports games. The subtle but unmistakable division of assignments, complex technical tasks going to the younger staff, routine paperwork increasingly falling to the older employees. Had it always been this way, and I had been too busy or too accepting to notice? Or had the dynamic shifted gradually, like water wearing away stone until the landscape was fundamentally altered? After the meeting, I returned to my cubicle and threw myself into my work with mechanical efficiency. At 12:30 p.m., my usual lunch hour, I headed to the break room with my brown bag lunch, a turkey sandwich, and an apple, the same lunch I packed 3 days a week. As I sat at one of the small tables, Jessica and Tara, 2 of the newer claims processors in their late 20s, came in laughing about something on Jessica's phone. They nodded politely in my direction but didn't invite me to join their conversation, settling at a table across the room. I had never expected to be included in their social circle. The generational gap seemed too wide to bridge, but today, their casual dismissal stung in a way it never had before. "Did you see the email about the claims software update?" Jessica was saying, loud enough for me to hear. "Richard's putting together a training team to learn it first and then teach everyone else." Tara nodded eagerly. "I already told him I want to be on it. It'll look great for my performance review." Jessica lowered her voice slightly, but not enough. "I heard they're looking at restructuring some of the older positions once the new system is in place." Richard told Kyle that some of the senior processors might struggle with the learning curve. They both glanced in my direction. then quickly away when they realized I might have heard. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Restructuring older positions. I had adapted to every software change, every policy update, every industry shift over the past 19 years. I had perfect performance reviews and handled some of our most complex claims. But sitting there, watching the younger women whisper and glance my way, I suddenly felt as invisible and irrelevant as I had standing in Amber's doorway. Too old for this party. Too old for this job. That afternoon, I did something unprecedented. At 3:15 p.m., I walked to Richard's office and knocked on his open door. He looked up from his computer, surprise flickering across his face. I rarely sought him out. "Ellen, what can I do for you?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat down, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I'd like to be on the training team for the new claims software," I said without preamble. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, well, we're looking for people who can pick it up quickly and then help others transition," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "It's going to be pretty intensive. I've been through 6 major software transitions at this company." I pointed out. "I trained half the department on the last update, including you." The words came out more sharply than I had intended, and Richard's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "That's true," he acknowledged. "But this system is very different, much more intuitive for digital natives." Digital natives, the term hung in the air between us. Its meaning clear. Not me. Not anyone my age. "I see," I said quietly. "So you've already decided who's on the team?" Richard shuffled some papers on his desk, not meeting my eyes. "Not officially, but we're leaning toward folks who won't need as much ramp-up time. Kyle, Jessica, Tara, that group. I'd like to be considered," I persisted. "I have more experience with our claims process than anyone on that list, which means I'll see nuances and potential issues they might miss." Richard sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, Ellen, I appreciate your interest. I really do. But we need to be thinking about the company's future. The insurance industry is changing, becoming more tech-focused. We need people who can grow with these changes over the next decade or more." The implication was crystal clear. I wouldn't be around for the next decade. I was not the future of Midwest insurance. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling oddly numb. "Thank you for your honesty, Richard," I said, surprised by the calm in my voice when inside I felt anything but calm. "I'd still like to formally request consideration for the team. You can email me your decision." I walked out of his office before he could respond, my back straight, my footsteps measured until I reached the women's restroom. There, in the last stall, I sat on the closed toilet lid and pressed my hands against my eyes, breathing deeply to control the rage and humiliation that threatened to overwhelm me. Digital natives. The company's future. All code for the same message Amber had delivered. "You're too old." I took exactly 5 minutes to compose myself, then washed my hands, reapplied my lipstick, and returned to my cubicle where I worked with mechanical precision until 5 p.m. As I drove home, my conversation with Richard replayed in my head, alongside Jessica and Tara's whispered comments about restructuring. Was my job at risk? After 19 years of loyal service, could I be pushed out simply because I had committed the unforgivable sin of aging? The thought was both terrifying and infuriating. My mortgage had another 12 years. My retirement savings, while consistent, had taken hits during the 2008 recession, and again when I helped pay for Amber's college. I had always assumed I would work at Midwest Insurance until I chose to retire at 65 or even 70. Now that certainty seemed naive. That evening, as I mechanically prepared a simple dinner of baked chicken and steamed vegetables, I unblocked Amber's number and saw I had 3 missed calls from her. I wasn't ready to talk, but I sent a text. "I'm fine. Still processing. We'll call you later this week." Her response was immediate. "Mom, please, I'm really worried." "What's going on?" I stared at the message, wondering how to explain the seismic shift that had occurred inside me. How could I tell my daughter that her casual cruelty had torn away a veil, forcing me to see what I had been avoiding for years, that in the eyes of the world, and even my own child. I was becoming invisible. Instead, I wrote, "I need some space right now. I'm not in danger, just thinking. Please respect that." Then I silenced my phone and set it aside. After dinner, I found myself drawn back to my laptop, searching for information about age discrimination in the workplace. What I discovered was both enlightening and disturbing. Despite laws prohibiting it, age discrimination was rampant and difficult to prove. Workers over 50 were less likely to be hired, more likely to be laid off, and received fewer opportunities for advancement than their younger colleagues. Women faced this bias even more acutely than men, with the combined effects of ageism and sexism creating what some researchers called a double jeopardy. The more I read, the more my personal experience seemed to fit into a larger, troubling pattern. By the time I went to bed that night, a plan was beginning to form in my mind. If Richard and Midwest Insurance saw me as obsolete, perhaps it was time to show them exactly what they would be losing. And if my own daughter thought I was too old to be part of her life, maybe it was time to build a life that didn't revolve around her. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. As I drifted off to sleep, Patricia's words echoed in my mind. We used to be interested in a lot of things, before life got in the way. What had I been interested in, before life got in the way? Tuesday morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I selected my outfit with deliberate care, a deep blue blouse that Kate had once told me brought out my eyes, dress pants with a better cut than my usual work slacks, and a pair of heeled boots I rarely wore because they weren't practical for all-day office wear. I applied my makeup with more attention than usual, and even took the time to style my hair instead of just pulling it back in my typical low ponytail. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror seemed somehow more present, more substantial than the faded version of myself I had grown accustomed to seeing. At work, I arrived 15 minutes early and went straight to my computer. For the next hour, I meticulously documented every major project I had completed in the past year, every client I had retained, every problem I had solved. I created a spreadsheet calculating the dollar value of the accounts I managed and my success rate at resolving complex claims. The result was impressive even to me. I handled over $4.2 million in claims annually, with a resolution rate 17% higher than the department average and a client retention rate of 98%. These weren't just numbers. They were proof of my value to the company. At 9:30 a.m., I received an email from Richard. After consideration, we've finalized the training team for the new software. While your interest is appreciated, we've selected team members who we believe will adapt most quickly to the new system. You'll receive training in the second phase of implementation. No surprise, but seeing it in writing sent a fresh wave of anger through me. I responded with a simple, understood, thank you for the update. Then I printed out my performance documentation and saved a copy to a USB drive that I tucked into my purse. Throughout the day, I approached my work with a new perspective. Instead of simply processing claims as quickly as possible, I began looking for inefficiencies in the system, noting them in a separate document. I reviewed our department's client communication templates with a critical eye, identifying outdated language and confusing instructions. By the end of the day, I had compiled a detailed analysis of how our claims process could be streamlined to improve both employee efficiency and client satisfaction. It wasn't that I hadn't seen these issues before. I had simply accepted them as fixed realities, not problems I could help solve. As I was preparing to leave for the day, I remembered the writing group flyer and Patricia's invitation. It was Tuesday. The group would be meeting at 7 p.m. The thought of walking into a room full of strangers made my stomach tighten with anxiety. What would I even write about? What would these women think of me? But underneath the anxiety was a flicker of something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or hope. Before I could talk myself out of it, I texted Kate, going to try a writing group tonight at the community center. Wish me luck. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. Yes, so proud of you. Call me after and tell me everything. I stopped at a sandwich shop on the way to the community center, suddenly realizing I was hungry but too nervous to eat a full meal. As I sat in my car in the parking lot, I almost turned around and went home 3 separate times. But at 6:55 p.m., I found myself walking through the doors of the community center, following the signs to room 108, where a handwritten poster announced Women's Writing Circle, all welcome. The room was arranged with chairs in a loose circle, about 15 in total. 8 were already occupied by women ranging in age from what looked like mid-20s to at least 70. Patricia was there, and she smiled warmly when she saw me hovering in the doorway. "Ellen, you came," she exclaimed, standing up to greet me. "Everyone, this is Ellen. She's joining us for the first time tonight." There were nods and smiles of welcome as Patricia guided me to an empty chair. "We're just about to get started," she explained. "Marissa runs the group. That's her over there with the fantastic earrings." Marissa was a tall, black woman in her early 60s, with elegant silver braids and, indeed, fantastic earrings that looked like miniature abstract sculptures. She carried herself with the confident grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. "Welcome, Ellen," she said warmly. "We're glad you're here. No pressure to share tonight. Feel free to just listen and get a feel for how we do things." I nodded gratefully, clutching my purse in my lap like a shield. The format, as Marissa explained it, was simple. Each meeting began with a writing prompt. Everyone wrote for 20 minutes. Then those who wished to could share what they had written. Feedback was focused on encouragement and specific positive observations, not criticism. "This is a space for exploration and growth," Marissa emphasized. "Not a critique group." She revealed the evening's prompt. "Write about a moment when you felt invisible, and what you wish you had said or done instead." My heart skipped a beat. The prompt could not have been more perfect, or more terrifying. As the women around me bent over notebooks or tablets, I pulled out the small notebook I had purchased on impulse at the sandwich shop and a pen from my purse. For a moment, I stared at the blank page, paralyzed. Then I began to write, hesitantly at first, then with increasing speed as words I didn't even know I had been holding inside poured onto the page. I wrote about standing in Amber's doorway, hearing those 7 words that had shifted something fundamental inside me. I wrote about the shame and hurt that had flooded through me in that moment, and how I wished I had stood my ground instead of retreating. I wrote about the years of putting everyone else first, my daughter, my job, my responsibilities, while slowly disappearing as a person with my own desires and dreams. When Marissa gently announced that our 20 minutes were up, I was startled to find that I had filled 3 pages with my cramped handwriting. I looked up to see the other women setting aside their writing, some looking contemplative, others emotional. "Who would like to share tonight?" Marissa asked. Several hands went up immediately. I kept mine firmly in my lap, my heart racing at the thought of reading my raw, unfiltered feelings aloud to a room of strangers. One by one, the women shared their pieces. A young woman in her 20s read about being ignored by doctors who dismissed her chronic pain. An elegant woman in her 70s described the experience of being rendered invisible when her husband of 47 years died, and how former friends seemed not to know how to interact with her as a widow, rather than as part of a couple. A middle-aged woman with vibrant red hair shared a powerful piece about being talked over in meetings by male colleagues. Each story resonated with me in different ways, each voice authentic and strong even when describing moments of weakness or hurt. As the sharing continued, something shifted inside me. These women were not embarrassed by their vulnerability. They owned their experiences and their emotions without apology. They spoke their truth, and in doing so, claimed their visibility. When Marissa asked if anyone else would like to share, I found myself raising my hand before I could reconsider. My voice shook as I began reading, but steadied as I continued, the words flowing from the page in a current of long-suppressed emotion. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, then murmurs of understanding and recognition. "Thank you for sharing that, Ellen," Marissa said, her eyes warm with empathy. That moment of rejection from someone we love, especially our children, cuts so deeply. Several women nodded in agreement. Patricia, sitting across from me, leaned forward. "The way you described that feeling of disappearing over time, of putting yourself last until there's almost nothing left, that really resonated with me. I've been there. Others chimed in with similar sentiments, each comment affirming that my experience wasn't unique or shameful, but part of a shared reality that many women faced as they aged. By the time the meeting ended at 8:30 p.m., I felt both emotionally drained and curiously invigorated. Several women approached me afterward, introducing themselves and encouraging me to return next week. Patricia insisted on giving me her phone number for writing emergencies. She said with a smile, "Or coffee." I'm always up for coffee. As I drove home, I called Kate as promised and told her about the experience, my words tumbling over each other in my eagerness to share. "It sounds amazing," Kate said when I finally paused for breath. "Are you going back next week?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, definitely yes." There was a smile in Kate's voice when she replied, "I think this is the beginning of something important." Ellen, as I pulled into my driveway, I realized she was right. Something had begun, not just at the writing group, but inside me, a spark of recognition, of reclamation, a small voice whispering, "I am still here, I matter, I am not invisible." The rest of the week passed in a blur of work and increasingly urgent messages from Amber. By Friday, she had moved from worried texts to angry ones. "This is ridiculous. Mom, whatever I did, you're overreacting." The accusation stung, but also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally reacting after years of accommodation and self-erasure. That evening, I finally called her. "Mom." She answered immediately. "What is going on with you?" "I've been worried sick." The concern in her voice was genuine, which made what I needed to say even harder. "We need to talk about what happened at your party," I said, my voice calm despite my racing heart. "When you told me I was too old to be there." There was a pause, then Amber sighed. "Is that what this is about?" "Mom, you're blowing this way out of proportion. I just didn't think you'd have fun with a bunch of 20-somethings. I was looking out for you." The casual dismissal of my feelings was so expected that I almost accepted it, almost retreated into my habitual role of understanding mother, who never made waves. But the woman who had sat in that writing circle, who had documented her value at work, who had begun to reclaim her visibility, would not be so easily silenced. "No, Amber," I said firmly. "You weren't looking out for me, you were embarrassed by me." And that hurt more than I can express. My daughter's sharp intake of breath was followed by defensive words. "That's not fair. I wasn't embarrassed, I just... My friends are different from you. They're into different things." I closed my eyes, gathering my courage. "Would you have asked your father to leave if he had shown up at your party?" The question hung between us, its implications clear. Amber's father was only 2 years older than me, but as a man, his age didn't render him socially irrelevant in the same way. "That's different," Amber protested weakly. "Yes, it is different," I agreed, "but not for the reasons you think. It's different because your father chose to leave, while I chose to stay and raise you alone. It's different because I have spent 23 years putting your needs first, often at the expense of my own. And now I'm learning that maybe that wasn't the healthiest choice for either of us." Amber was silent, and I could almost see her processing my words, unused to hearing me speak so directly about my own feelings. "I love you more than anything in this world," I continued, my voice gentler. "But I need you to understand that I am more than just your mother. I am a whole person, with feelings and dreams and value that exists independently of my relationship to you. And when you dismissed me that way, you made me feel worthless. Mom, I never meant to." Amber's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't think about it that way. I'm sorry." The apology felt genuine, but I knew this conversation was just the beginning of a necessary shift in our relationship. "I know you didn't intend to hurt me," I acknowledged, "but impact matters more than intent. I need some time and space to work through this, to figure out who I am outside of being your mother. Can you understand that?" There was a long pause before Amber replied, her voice small. "I think so. I mean, I'm trying to. Are we okay though?" The question held echoes of the little girl who used to ask the same thing after our rare arguments, seeking reassurance that our bond remained unbroken. We will be, I promised. But things need to change. I need to change. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet living room, emotionally exhausted but also strangely peaceful. For perhaps the first time in decades, I had prioritized my own emotional needs instead of smoothing things over for someone else's comfort. It felt terrifying and empowering all at once. The weekend stretched before me, unstructured time that I would once have filled with chores, errands, or whatever Amber needed. Instead, I made a decision to focus on rediscovering what brought me joy. On Saturday morning, I dug out my old digital camera, a gift from Kate 3 Christmases ago that I had barely used, and drove to the botanical gardens across town. I spent 4 hours wandering among the early summer flowers, experimenting with angles and light, completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of seeing beauty and capturing it. That evening, I downloaded the photos to my computer and was surprised to find that several were quite good, not professional quality, certainly, but showing a genuine eye for composition that pleased me. Sunday brought rain, so I turned to indoor pursuits. I pulled out the writing I had started at the group and continued exploring those feelings on the page. The words came more easily now, flowing from some deep reservoir I hadn't known existed within me. I wrote about my job, about Richard's dismissal, about the gradual erosion of confidence that had accompanied my advancing years. And I wrote about my growing anger, not a destructive rage, but a clarifying fire that burned away pretense and illuminated truth. By evening, I had filled 15 pages with my thoughts and experiences. Reading them back, I was struck by a pattern that emerged. For too long, I had accepted limitations imposed by others without question. It was time to start questioning. Monday morning, I arrived at work with a new sense of purpose. Instead of waiting to be excluded, I decided to make myself undeniably visible. When Richard announced a team meeting at 10 a.m., I came prepared with printed copies of my efficiency analysis and process improvement suggestions. As the meeting was wrapping up, I spoke up. Before we finish, I'd like to share some observations about our claims process. Richard looked surprised but nodded, clearly not expecting anything substantial. I distributed my analysis to everyone at the table. I've identified several inefficiencies in our current workflow that are costing us approximately 7.5 hours per processor each week, I explained, pointing out specific issues and my proposed solutions. The room fell silent as my colleagues reviewed my findings. Richard's expression shifted from surprise to reluctant interest as he realized the merit in what I was presenting. This is, quite detailed, he acknowledged. When did you put this together? I met his gaze steadily. I've been noting these issues for some time, but compiled the formal analysis last week. I'd be happy to lead a small team to implement these changes if you're interested in pursuing them. The assertiveness in my voice was new, and I could see it registered with everyone in the room, particularly the younger staff who had never seen this side of me. Kyle, one of the digital natives selected for the software training team, leaned forward with genuine interest. These suggestions about the client communication templates are spot on. The current ones are confusing even to me, and I wrote half of them. His validation opened the floodgates, with other team members chiming in with their own observations that supported my analysis. Richard looked increasingly uncomfortable as it became clear that my experience had allowed me to see systemic problems that others had missed. "This is good work, Ellen," he finally said, gathering the papers in front of him. "Let me review it more thoroughly, and we'll discuss implementation possibilities." It wasn't a commitment, but it was more than I had expected. As the meeting broke up, several colleagues stopped to compliment my analysis, including Meredith, who whispered, "About time someone said something. Good for you." Even Jessica and Tara looked at me with new respect as they passed my desk later that day. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Richard. "After reviewing your analysis, I'd like to add you to the software training team. Your perspective on process improvement could be valuable as we implement the new system. Please let me know if you're still interested." I smiled at the screen, recognizing the email for what it was: not a sudden revelation about my worth, but a strategic move to include me now that I had demonstrated my value too publicly to ignore. Still, it was a start. I replied simply, I accept. Thank you for the opportunity. The next few weeks brought subtle but significant changes. At work, I found myself increasingly included in discussions about the software transition. My efficiency recommendations were gradually being implemented, with my name attached to the initiative. Richard's attitude toward me remained professionally correct rather than warm, but he no longer spoke over me in meetings or assigned me only routine tasks. I had made myself visible through competence and assertiveness, and the results were undeniable. In my personal life, the transformation was even more profound. The writing group became the highlight of my week, a space where I could express my thoughts and emotions without fear of judgment. Through these women, diverse in age, background, and experience, I began to build a community that valued me for my mind and spirit, not merely for my usefulness to others. Patricia and I began meeting for coffee outside the group, and our conversations ranged from books and politics to our shared experiences of invisibility and reclamation. Aging is a privilege denied to many, she told me over lattes one Saturday afternoon. But society treats it like a shameful decline, especially for women. Rejecting that narrative is a revolutionary act. My relationship with Amber remained complicated but was slowly evolving. After 2 weeks of limited contact, we met for lunch at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between our homes. The conversation was stilted at first, both of us uncertain of this new dynamic. But as I shared some of what I had been experiencing and learning, I saw something shift in her expression, a dawning recognition that I existed beyond her perception of me, that my life had dimensions she had never considered. I've never really thought about what it must have been like for you, she admitted as we were finishing our meal. Raising me alone, giving up so much. And now, double quotes, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Now watching me live the kind of independent life you never got to have in your 20s. That must be complicated. The insight surprised me, revealing a maturity and empathy I hadn't given her credit for. It is complicated, I acknowledged. I don't regret the choices I made for you, not for a second, but I am trying to make different choices for myself now. Amber nodded, twisting her napkin in her fingers. I get that, and I really am sorry about the party. It was cruel, and you deserved better. The simple acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes, which I didn't try to hide. Thank you, I said softly. That means a lot. As we walked to our cars afterward, Amber hesitated, then gave me a quick, fierce hug. I love you, Mom, she whispered. Even when I'm a thoughtless jerk. I laughed through my tears, hugging her back. I love you too. Even when you're a thoughtless jerk. As summer turned to early fall, I continued to reclaim spaces in my life where I had allowed myself to become invisible. I joined a photography club that met monthly at the community center, sharing my growing portfolio of nature shots and urban landscapes. I reconnected with old friends who had fallen by the wayside as I focused exclusively on work and motherhood. I even started dating, cautiously at first, through a website specifically for singles over 50 that Patricia recommended. My first coffee date was awkward but surprisingly fun. A reminder that I was still capable of feeling attraction and interest, beyond the comfortable numbness that had become my emotional default. At work, the new software system was rolling out, and to everyone's surprise, especially Richard's, I adapted to it quickly, often helping younger colleagues troubleshoot issues they encountered. The irony wasn't lost on me or them. By October, 3 months after Amber's fateful birthday party, I had become an integral part of the implementation team, my experience with our claims process proving invaluable as we transitioned to the new system. My visibility within the company was no longer in question, and with it came new opportunities, including an unexpected promotion to senior process analyst, a newly created position that came with a $7,500 annual raise and more influence over departmental decisions. The day I received the promotion, I called Kate immediately. I wish Mom could see this, I told her, thinking of our mother who had gone back to school at 54 and built a whole new career. She'd be so proud of you, Kate agreed, but not surprised. She always said you were the strong one. The comment startled me. I had never thought of myself as particularly strong, persistent, perhaps, responsible, dutiful, but strength implied a kind of power I had never associated with myself until recently. That evening, as I sat on my patio watching the sunset with a glass of wine, I thought about the concept of strength. True strength, I was learning, wasn't about never breaking or bending. It was about continuing to grow, even through the breaks and bends, about using the inevitable wounds of life as openings for new light to enter. The hurt of Amber's rejection had cracked open a shell I hadn't even realized I was living inside, allowing me to emerge more fully into my own life. The writing group had a saying, introduced by Marissa at the beginning of each session: "Your story matters. Your voice matters. You matter." 6 months ago, I would have nodded politely at such affirmations, while inwardly dismissing them as feel-good platitudes. Now I understood their power. When we claim our right to be seen and heard, we do more than assert our individual worth. We create space for others to do the same. Each time I spoke up in a meeting, shared a piece of writing, or simply refused to shrink myself to make others comfortable, I was not just reclaiming my own visibility, but helping to forge a world where women like me would not be so easily dismissed. One Tuesday evening in late October, I arrived at the writing group to find Marissa waiting with a special announcement. Our community center is hosting an event next month called Women's Voices, Stories of Resilience and Reclamation, she explained, her eyes bright with excitement. They've asked our group to participate by sharing pieces about our journeys. The room buzzed with a mixture of enthusiasm and nervous energy at the prospect of reading for a larger audience. Participation is completely voluntary, Marissa assured us, but I hope many of you will consider sharing your powerful stories. As the group discussed the opportunity, I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Reading my writing in our safe circle was one thing. Speaking to a room full of strangers was quite another. But underneath the anxiety was a stronger impulse, a recognition that my story of invisibility and reclamation might resonate with others, still trapped in silence and self-erasure. When Marissa asked who was interested in participating, I raised my hand alongside several others, including Patricia. "Looks like we'll be stage buddies," she whispered to me with a conspiratorial wink. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked on a piece specifically for the event, drawing from the writing I had been doing since that first group meeting. The process was both challenging and cathartic, requiring me to distill months of emotional evolution into a 10-minute reading that captured the essence of my journey. I shared drafts with Patricia, who offered thoughtful feedback and encouragement. "Your voice gets stronger with every revision," she told me after reading my near-final draft. "It's like watching someone turn up the volume on themselves." The night of the event arrived cold and clear. Stars visible above the community center, where approximately 70 people, mostly women, but some men as well, gathered in the main hall. The space had been transformed with soft lighting, a small stage area, and rows of chairs arranged to create an intimate atmosphere, despite the size of the room. My stomach knotted with nerves as I took my place in the second row, alongside Patricia and other members of our writing group. Marissa would be the evening's host, introducing each speaker and facilitating the program. As the first few women shared their stories, experiences ranging from workplace discrimination to domestic violence to cultural silencing, I was struck by the common thread running through each narrative: the journey from invisibility to reclamation, from silence to voice. The audience listened with rapt attention, responding with murmurs of recognition, occasional tears, and supportive applause after each speaker. When Patricia's name was called, she squeezed my hand before making her way to the stage, her silver hair catching the light as she moved with confident grace to the podium. Patricia's story centered on her experience as a widow at 62, navigating a world that seemed to have no place for her outside the identity of wife she had held for 40 years. "I became a ghost in my own life," she read, her voice strong and clear. "Transparent at dinner parties where I had once been half of a sought-after couple, invisible to friends who didn't know what to do with just one where there had always been two." She described her gradual reclamation of self through writing, through friendship, through the simple act of taking up space unapologetically. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, and I felt a surge of pride for my friend, who had helped me find my own path back to visibility. Then Marissa was announcing my name, and suddenly I was walking toward the stage. My carefully prepared pages clutched in hands that trembled slightly, despite my best efforts to appear calm. As I looked out at the audience, faces expectant, attentive, open, I took a deep breath and began to read. 3 months ago, my daughter told me I was too old for her birthday party. Those 7 words cracked open my world, forcing me to confront a truth I had been avoiding for years, that I had become invisible. Not just to society, but to myself. The words flowed more easily than I had expected, my voice gaining strength and conviction, as I shared my journey from that moment of rejection to my gradual reclamation of space and voice in my own life. I spoke of workplace discrimination disguised as concern, of social erasure masked as protection, of the small daily surrenders that had accumulated until I barely recognized myself. And I spoke of awakening through writing, through friendship, through the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to disappear. Invisibility is not a natural condition of aging, I read, reaching the conclusion of my piece. It is imposed, and then internalized, until we police our own diminishment. But visibility, true visibility, begins when we refuse to participate in our own erasure. When we claim our right to be seen, to be heard, to take up space regardless of our age or appearance. My journey back to visibility isn't complete, and perhaps it never will be. But I am no longer willing to disappear for anyone's comfort, including my own. As I finished, there was a moment of complete silence, and my heart sank. Had I misjudged my words, my delivery, the receptiveness of the audience? Then the applause began, building from scattered clapping to a wave of sound that washed over me with unexpected force. I looked up to see people nodding, some wiping tears, others smiling in recognition, and in the back of the room, a figure I hadn't noticed before, Amber, standing with her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. After the program ended, audience members mingled with the speakers, sharing their own stories and expressions of gratitude. I was surrounded by women of various ages, each with her own variation on my experience, each thanking me for putting words to feelings they had struggled to articulate. In the midst of this affirming chaos, Amber made her way to me, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "I didn't know you were speaking tonight," I said, surprised and somewhat wary. "How did you?" She gave a small, sheepish smile. "Patricia called me, said I might learn something important if I came." I made a mental note to both thank and scold Patricia for her well-intentioned meddling. "And did you?" I asked quietly. "Learn something important?" Amber nodded, her composure cracking slightly. "I had no idea, Mom, about any of it. About how it feels to be ... overlooked that way. About what you've been going through." She paused, visibly gathering her thoughts. "Your speech was amazing. You were amazing up there. So strong and articulate and ... visible." The word held new meaning between us now. A recognition of what had been lost and what might yet be reclaimed. "I'm still figuring it all out," I admitted. "Who I am now, who I want to be going forward. But I know I can't go back to who I was before." Amber surprised me by nodding in understanding rather than protesting. "I don't think I'd want you to," she said thoughtfully. "The mom up on that stage tonight, she's kind of incredible." The compliment warmed me, but I recognized it for what it was, a beginning, not an end to our necessary renegotiation of boundaries and expectations. As the event wound down, Patricia found us talking and introduced herself properly to Amber. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," she said, with the straightforward certainty that I had come to appreciate in her. "But then, you probably already know that." Amber glanced at me, a new respect in her eyes. "I'm learning," she replied honestly. The three of us walked out together into the crisp autumn night, our breath forming clouds in the cold air as we made our way to the parking lot. That night marked a turning point, though not an ending. The journey from invisibility to reclamation isn't a straight line, but a spiral, moving forward even as it sometimes circles back through familiar territory. There are still days when I feel the pull of old patterns, the temptation to shrink myself for others' comfort. There are still moments when society reminds me of the unspoken rules about how women my age should behave, dress, aspire, exist. But those reminders no longer have the power they once did. 6 months after Amber's birthday party, my life has transformed in ways both subtle and profound. At work, my new position has brought challenges and opportunities that engage my mind and value my experience. I've become something of a mentor to several younger colleagues, including Tara, who sought me out for guidance after the software transition proved more complicated than anticipated. Richard still occasionally slips into his old dismissive patterns, but he's learned that I will call him on it politely but firmly when he does. My relationship with Amber continues to evolve, sometimes awkwardly, always authentically. We're learning to see each other as complete people, not just as mother and daughter locked in roles defined by the past. She's started asking me about my writing, my photography, my thoughts on things beyond her immediate concerns. And I'm learning to share those parts of myself without fear of seeming selfish or self-involved. Last week, she invited me to a small dinner gathering at her apartment, not out of obligation, but because, as she put it, my friends should get to know who you really are. My circle has expanded beyond Amber to include the women from the writing group, especially Patricia, who has become a dear friend and occasional partner in what she calls adventures in visibility. Everything from attending art gallery openings to taking a weekend kayaking trip. Experiences I would never have considered for myself a year ago. I've even started dating more regularly, cautiously exploring the possibility of romantic connection with a wisdom and self-knowledge I certainly didn't possess in my younger years. But perhaps the most significant change is internal, the quiet certainty that I am worthy of being seen, of being heard, of taking up space exactly as I am. Not despite my age and experience, but because of them. This certainty doesn't make me immune to doubt or insecurity, but it provides a foundation from which to weather those inevitable storms. As Marissa often reminds us at the writing group, your story isn't over until you say it is. And my story, I've discovered, is still very much in progress. Last month, I submitted a piece to a literary journal focused on women's experiences. Last week, I signed up for a photography workshop in Arizona next spring, my first solo vacation in over 20 years. Yesterday, I spoke at a panel on age discrimination in the workplace, sharing my experience and strategies with others facing similar challenges. Each step feels both terrifying and right, a reclamation of possibilities I had to quickly surrendered. When I look in the mirror now, I see a woman who has stopped apologizing for her existence. The lines around my eyes speak of laughter and tears, of life fully lived. The silver strands in my hair catch the light like threads of wisdom earned through experience. I am 52 years old, neither young nor old, but precisely where I am meant to be in the continuum of my life, visible, present, unapologetic. The journey from invisibility to reclamation isn't complete, perhaps it never will be. But I am moving forward one word, one day, one act of self-reclamation at a time. And that, I have learned, is more than enough.